My dad raised his glass and said, "Some kids make you proud. Others just take up space." Everyone laughed. I grinned and replied, "Good thing I just got my own place 3,000 miles away. Don't worry, you'll never." That Thanksgiving night in Indianapolis, the fault line in my family finally fractured, irrevocably changing everything. The dining table, a heavy oak relic, shimmered with unearned polish, reflecting the chandelier above. The turkey, an imposing centerpiece, was perfect. My father, Robert, sat at its head, his glass raised high, a king surveying his quiet dominion. Then he uttered the words that would echo for years, chiseling themselves into the core of my being. "Some kids make you proud," he declared, pausing just long enough for the sting to land, "and others just take up space." The room erupted in a tide of laughter. My brother, Ethan, his wife, even the children, too young to grasp the casual cruelty, joined in. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I merely smiled, a mask of composure I'd perfected over years, and met his gaze. "Good thing I just bought my own place 2,000 miles away," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "Don't worry, you'll never have to make space for me again." The silence that followed was a physical entity, heavier than any argument I could have launched. For the first time that evening, he had nothing left to say. Have you ever felt that profound sting, that desperate need to smile just to survive a family's casual cruelty? That moment of being utterly diminished, yet finding an unexpected, quiet strength? Tell me, where are you watching from? I need to know I'm not alone in that quiet battle. I grew up in a quiet suburb, a mosaic of identical lawns and mailboxes bearing the same family names. Every father, it seemed, beamed with pride at his son. Our house was small, white with green shutters, a place steeped in the scent of morning coffee and motor oil. Neighbors waved, a choreographed ritual of suburban normalcy. Sundays meant church, followed by the same diner, a tableau of perfection. To them, we were ideal. Robert, the dependable patriarch; Linda, the gentle homemaker; Ethan, the local football hero; and me, the quiet one, barely remembered. From the outside, we were a picture-perfect facade. Inside, I was the shadow that inadvertently made everyone else's light seem brighter. Ethan was the sun around which our household orbited. His trophies, silver footballs, gleaming medals, and certificates lined the hallway, a museum of my father's unwavering pride. I used to trace the engraved letters of Ethan's name, my fingers lingering, wondering if my own name would ever belong there. When Ethan won, Dad hoisted him onto his shoulders, a ritual of triumph. When I achieved something, he'd glance at my ribbon and dismiss it with a patronizing, "That's cute, honey. But don't forget Ethan's game is tonight." I remember that sentence more vividly than any lullaby. It was the relentless rhythm of my childhood, the unforgiving beat of favoritism. At 10, my cardboard volcano, a clandestine creation of baking soda and vinegar, erupted perfectly at the science fair, earning me a small blue ribbon. I'd toiled for weeks, sneaking into the kitchen long after everyone slept, testing proportions under the refrigerator's lonely hum. I dared hope maybe this time Dad would truly see me. When I showed him the ribbon, he merely chuckled. "That's nice, Izzy, but make sure you're ready for your brother's big match tonight. He'll need all of us cheering." That word "us" never truly included me. My birthday followed 2 months later. Mom baked a small vanilla cake, devoid of frosting flowers or candles spelling my name. "It's just family this year," she'd murmured, her voice a soft apology. Yet, a week later, they hosted a sprawling backyard bash for Ethan's college acceptance, complete with tents, music, and half the neighborhood. I remember standing by the window, watching the fairy lights flicker while my brother posed with friends, a cake before him proclaiming, "To our star." That was the night I understood invisibility wasn't an accident in our family. It was a cherished tradition. Even our dinners bore the weight of hierarchy. The oak table, meant for 6, always had 4 adult chairs and 2 smaller ones at the far end. For years, even as I grew taller, I was consigned to the kids' table. At 16, I sat there again, knees bumping the edge, an unwelcome eavesdropper to conversations I was never invited to join. Every attempt to speak was met with polite nods, quick dismissals, or worse, deafening silence. Ethan, however, could ramble about anything: college football, cars, the weather, and Dad would beam as if he'd just recited poetry. If I dared to share a curious fact, like honey's eternal shelf life or the ancient light of distant stars, Dad would frown. "You think too much, Izzy. You'll tire yourself out." Mom wasn't cruel. She was careful, a woman who believed peace meant quiet. When Dad spoke, she'd fold napkins with meticulous precision. When I cried, she'd whisper, "Don't make things harder for your father." Her softness wounded deeper than his words. His sharpness, at least, acknowledged my existence. Hers erased it. There's a photograph somewhere, Thanksgiving 2006 perhaps. Ethan stands behind Dad, both in matching shirts, grinning. I'm a blur at the periphery, half out of frame, holding a plate. Mom took that picture. Years later, I looked at it, noticing how my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. You can see it if you know what to look for. The quiet child, diligently trying not to take up too much space in her own home. Still, I try to earn my way in. Straight A's, scholarships, volunteering, building robots from discarded radios. Nothing cracked the wall. The more I achieved, the more invisible I became, as if my very brightness threatened to disturb their meticulously framed picture. Once, when I was 15, Ethan failed an exam. Dad spent the entire weekend tutoring him. That same weekend, I received a letter for a state science competition. When I handed it to him, he nodded distractedly, his eyes still fixed on Ethan's notes. "That's good," he said. "Just don't make your brother feel bad." That sentence became the first rule of our household. My silence was the price of their comfort. Looking back, I realized how early I learned to disappear, to laugh softly, to shrink in photos, to walk lightly so the floorboards wouldn't creak. I learned to make myself small enough to fit into the leftover spaces no one else wanted. By 18, I had perfected the art of being unseen. The basement became my refuge long before I understood the meaning of the word. Upstairs echoed with the roar of ESPN highlights and my father's booming laughter. Below, only quiet. The hum of an old fluorescent light, the faint buzz of electricity through tangled cords, the comforting scent of dust and metal. It was cold in winter, damp in spring, but it was mine. Every corner of that unfinished space, from the crooked shelves stacked with broken appliances to the workbench littered with screwdrivers, became a sanctuary. I didn't have a room where my voice mattered, but I had a place where things listened when I touched them. It began with a broken radio, salvaged from a box my father deemed useless junk. To me, it was a mystery waiting to be solved. I carried it downstairs, unscrewed the back panel, and stared at the strange, intricate world of wires and circuits. I didn't understand it, but I knew it had once carried music, somewhere inside the silence. A song was trapped, waiting for release. I spent hours cross-legged on the concrete floor, devouring library books on transistors and coils, following YouTube tutorials late into the night. After a week of trial and error, a faint crackle emerged from the speaker, then static, and finally, a voice. My chest swelled with something I couldn't name: pride, perhaps, or a profound relief. I had made something broken work again. For the first time, something in my world listened when I spoke. I ran upstairs, clutching the dusty radio, and called out, "Dad, look, I fixed it." He barely glanced up from the TV. "That old thing? Huh. Well, get your brother a drink, will you? He's been practicing all day." I stood there for a few seconds, the radio a tangible proof of my existence, then turned, walked back downstairs, and placed it on my workbench. I never mentioned it again. That was the night I made myself a promise. If no one in this house would notice me, I would build something that couldn't be ignored. From then on, the basement transformed from a hiding place to a workshop of small rebellions. I disassembled anything I could find: clocks, microwaves, broken game consoles. I learned to solder, to strip wires, to breathe life back into dead things. Each spark from my soldering iron felt like a heartbeat, a pulse affirming my presence, my capability. There was something almost sacred in the way broken objects surrendered to patience. Machines didn't care about charm or popularity. They responded to effort, persistence, understanding. I couldn't fix my family, but I could fix everything else. One summer, at 16, I built my first computer entirely from discarded parts salvaged from the local recycling center. The fan rattled, the screen flickered, but when it powered on, I felt I had opened a portal to another world. I taught myself basic coding, printed 3D prototypes from online blueprints, and filled notebooks with designs I vowed to bring to life. It was never about escaping reality. It was about building a reality where I could finally belong. Of course, my father didn't see it that way. He'd occasionally descend, usually to store old paint cans or broken furniture. He'd glance around, frown at the clutter of circuit boards and wires, and mutter, "You should spend less time with junk and more time doing something useful." I never bothered explaining that junk was what kept me alive. My mother would sometimes peek in, her face half lit by the narrow stairway. "Don't work too hard, Isabel," she'd say softly. "You'll hurt your eyes." Then she'd vanish, as if her presence there, too, was forbidden. It wasn't cruelty, it was habit. The habit of staying out of my father's way, even if it meant staying out of mine. One afternoon, I found an old set of speakers in the garage, the same ones Dad had used when he still played vinyl. The wood casing warped, a cone torn, wires frayed. It felt poetic, something once loved, now discarded. I spent 2 nights repairing it, rewiring, sanding, sealing the cracks with resin. When finished, I carried it upstairs, bursting with quiet pride. Dad sat in his chair, reading the sports section. "It works again," I said softly. "You can use it in the living room." He looked up just long enough to nod. "Good. Now grab Ethan a glass of water before dinner." That was it. No acknowledgement, no curiosity, no interest. Just another reminder that even my successes were invisible here. I stood there, realizing the irony. I had given sound back to something broken, yet no one in this family would ever truly hear me. That night, I returned to the basement, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. The repaired radio played softly in the corner, the very one he'd called useless. A late-night jazz station, saxophone notes curling through the air like smoke. I thought, maybe I wasn't meant to be heard here. Maybe the silence of this house wasn't something to fight. Maybe it was something to outgrow. From that moment, every wire I soldered, every device I repaired became a step closer to freedom. I wasn't just fixing things. I was building an exit. I vowed that one day I would leave the basement, this house, this entire town. And when I did, I'd never look back. I didn't know where I'd go, only that it had to be far enough that my father's voice couldn't reach me, yet close enough that I could still hear the hum of something I had built, something that worked because I made it work. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, nestled between a grocery flyer and a stack of unpaid bills. The envelope was white, embossed with a red seal that shimmered faintly. Stanford University Office of Admissions. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I tore it open, scanning the words that would change everything. Congratulations. We are delighted to offer you a full scholarship. I reread the sentence, as if it might vanish. Then I ran down the hall, through the kitchen, bursting into the living room where my father, glasses perched low, read the sports section. "Dad," I gasped, breathless. "I got in. Full scholarship. Stanford." The name felt sacred on my tongue, proof that I had finally achieved something undeniable. For a second, I waited for his reaction. Surprise, pride, even a smile. But he just folded the newspaper slowly and looked up with the same expression he might give a weather forecast. "Stanford," he repeated flatly. "That's in California, isn't it?" I nodded, still grinning. "Yeah, it's one of the best engineering programs in the country." He leaned back, exhaled, and said, "That's too far. Ethan's going to Purdue, much more practical. If you want to go that far, you'll have to figure it out yourself." He picked up his newspaper. Conversation concluded. My mother, by the sink, murmured, "Your father's just worried about the distance," but wouldn't meet my eyes. No one said congratulations. No one took a picture. There was no cake, No dinner. No, we're proud of you. The moment that should have been a victory felt like a private secret, something small enough to fit in my pocket, where no one could take it away. That night, in the basement, I sat by my workbench and unfolded the letter again. The words still glowed, but they didn't feel like triumph. They felt like escape. I whispered Stanford aloud, letting the sound fill the empty room. For the first time, the idea of leaving wasn't just exciting, it felt necessary. The months blurred into a frenzy of preparation. I worked part-time at a hardware store, fixed old electronics for neighbors, sold custom-built speakers online. Every dollar earned was another inch between me and that house. Ethan, meanwhile, had a graduation party that consumed the entire backyard. My father, in his favorite polo, beamed in every photo beside him. When it was my turn to leave, there was no party, just a quiet morning and a half-packed suitcase. At the airport, smelling of coffee and disinfectant, my mother hugged me quickly, her hands cold against my back. "Call when you land," she said softly. My father stood stiffly beside her, arms crossed. "I'll send photos. I tried one last time." He nodded, looking past me. "Just make sure you don't forget where you came from." When it was time to board, I turned back. He wasn't looking. He was already heading for the parking lot, his figure shrinking. My mother followed, head down. Through the glass, I pressed my hand against the window, watching their silhouettes fade, a faint print on the glass that would vanish as soon as my flight took off. On the plane, I clutched the Stanford letter, gripping it whenever uncertainty stirred. I told myself that maybe once I was gone, they'd finally see me. That distance might sharpen their vision, make them realize who I'd been all along. But when I landed in California, no message came. No, we miss you. No, we're proud. Just silence. The first few weeks were a dizzying blur. Stanford was another planet. Red-tiled roofs, sunlight streaming through palm trees, students in sweatshirts bearing names of clubs I'd never heard of. I walked across the oval, feeling like an imposter in someone else's dream. My roommate's parents flew in from Seattle, bringing flowers, taking pictures, shedding tears as they left. I stood at the window, pretending not to watch, my hands empty. At night, in my dorm, I stared at the ceiling fan, replaying my father's turn back at the airport, my reflection in the glass. I had traveled 2,000 miles, but the distance inside me had doubled. It wasn't just geography, it was silence, carved into me like a second skin. I poured all that emptiness into my work. I studied harder than anyone, spending hours in the computer lab long after midnight. I joined a robotics team, where the hum of machines replaced conversations I didn't know how to start. When circuits lit up, I felt a familiar, quiet peace, the same satisfaction I used to find in the basement. But sometimes, after finishing a project or acing an exam, I catch myself glancing at my phone, waiting for a text that would never come. That's when I understood. Leaving home doesn't erase the hunger to be seen. It only changes where you starve. I thought distance would make them realize my worth. I thought success would make them proud. I was wrong. It only made the silence louder. My first years in California felt like walking a tightrope between exhaustion and survival. I arrived at Stanford with 2 suitcases, a secondhand laptop, and enough savings for 2 months if I stretched every dollar. The scholarship covered tuition, but not food, housing, or books. So I worked 2 part-time jobs, sometimes 3. By day, I devoured lectures on algorithms and supply chain design. By night, I wiped tables at a Palo Alto cafe, and on weekends, I stocked shelves at a local hardware store. My body never stopped moving, but my mind clung to one quiet mantra: keep going. Dinner was usually instant noodles or a half-eaten sandwich salvage for my shift. My bed, a sofa in a cramped shared apartment. My roommates had parents who wired the money weekly. I had silence. On sleepless nights, I'd stare at the ceiling, my mind drifting back to the basement, the hum of machines, the scent of dust and oil. It was strange how something that once felt like exile now seemed the only place I'd ever felt truly certain of myself. I found a new haven in the university's robotics lab. Open 24 hours, dimly lit, the air thick with the metallic tang of solder and ozone. There, amidst half-assembled drones and tangled wires, I felt alive again. Machines were still my language. Predictable, logical, reparable. People not so much. I'd lose hours perfecting a motion sensor, recalibrating a servo, my hands moving on instinct. Sometimes I'd stay so long the janitor would flick the lights, reminding me it was 3 a.m. It was during one of those nights that I collapsed. I hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, hadn't slept in 3. My vision blurred while testing a circuit board. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, the faint taste of metal in my mouth. A graduate student named Michael found me and rushed me to the campus clinic. When I woke, he sat beside my bed, holding a cup of warm tea. "You need to take care of yourself," he said gently. I wanted to laugh. Take care of myself? That was the only thing I'd been doing since I was old enough to realize no one else would. The doctor said I was severely anemic, undernourished, dehydrated. He suggested I call home, maybe ask for help. I nodded, knowing it wasn't an option. The last message from my father, months ago, was a forwarded link to an article about Ethan's latest football trophy, no comment attached. I deleted it unread. So, I went back to work, slower at first, but more determined. I learned to survive on little, discount groceries, late-night leftovers, free bread from the cafe. I told myself it was temporary, that struggle was the tax I paid for freedom. And in a way, it was true. Every hardship taught me something. How to code faster, think sharper, repair what others would discard. I started freelancing for small local businesses, automating basic logistics. That's how I first fell in love with systems. Not machines themselves, but the invisible networks that made them work together. By graduation, I had a small portfolio of projects and a reputation for stubbornness bordering on obsession. When a San Jose startup sought an entry-level engineer, I didn't hesitate. They specialized in logistics optimization, designing routes, managing warehouse flow, using AI to reduce waste. The company was small, run by 2 dream-driven engineers in a cramped office smelling of burnt coffee and ambition. I started as an intern, earning barely enough to cover rent, but for the first time I was building something that mattered. The pace was brutal. We worked 12-hour days, sometimes 16. The founders slept on the office couches. Soon, so did I. In the early months, our software crashed more than it ran. Clients canceled, investors ghosted us, and at one point we had only $800 left in the company account. I stayed anyway. I fixed bugs until my eyes stung, rewrote entire modules overnight when systems failed. There was one week I barely saw the sun, just screens glowing in the dark and the steady thump of my heartbeat, reminding me I was still alive. One evening, after a particularly long day, I stood outside, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. The world was quiet. Passing cars, neon signs flickering to life. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. No one here cared about Ethan. No one cared who my father was. The only thing that mattered was whether the system worked, whether the code held, whether the trucks moved on time. I had finally found a world where effort was currency, and I could finally afford to exist. But even success crept forward slowly. Months blurred into years, and exhaustion became familiar, almost comforting. I learned to code on 4 hours of sleep, make business calls with a fever, smile during investor meetings when my hands shook from caffeine and stress. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I was building something tangible, brick by invisible brick. Sometimes, staying late after everyone left, I'd turn on the small radio I kept by my desk, the same model I'd repaired in my father's basement years ago. It played softly, filling the sterile office with warmth. I'd watch the monitors flicker and think about how far I'd come. I wasn't anyone's daughter here. I wasn't the other child. I was Isabel Hart, an engineer, a builder, a woman who made systems work. Still, there were nights when loneliness pressed heavy on my chest, a silence no machine could fill. I'd imagine calling home, just to hear a familiar voice, but I knew what awaited. Indifference, small talk, maybe a passing mention of Ethan's latest milestone. So I called no one. I told myself that family could be built the same way as circuits, carefully, intentionally, with patience and design. I just hadn't found the right blueprint yet. Years later, looking back at those long nights, the hunger, the fear, the endless grind, I didn't see failure. I saw a foundation. Those years didn't break me. They shaped me. They taught me that strength isn't about who catches you when you fall. It's about learning to stand back up, even when no one notices you're down. I used to think I needed someone to lean on, but the truth is, I didn't have anyone. So I learned to become the thing I needed most. I became my own anchor, my own safety net, my own place to land. And that, I realized, was the beginning of everything. Success arrived quietly, almost without warning. One day, I was sleeping on a worn leather couch, eating leftover pizza while debugging a routing algorithm. The next, our software was being used by hospitals across California. It started small, a few regional clinics testing our logistics system to track medical supply deliveries in real time. Then the pandemic hit. Suddenly, every hospital in the state needed what we had. Demand exploded overnight. The chaos that shattered other companies became the wind beneath ours. Our platform, once held together by late nights and borrowed servers, became the unseen backbone of an entire medical network. We optimized routes for ventilators, masks, oxygen tanks. Our dashboards predicted shortages, rerouting trucks across states to keep ICUs from collapsing. For months, I barely left the office. My team slept on folding cots between workstations, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. Every ping from my phone, another shipment delivered, another hospital supported, felt like proof that my years of quiet work finally mattered. News outlets picked up the story. A small California startup is redefining emergency logistics. My inbox flooded with interview requests and partnership offers. One morning, I opened an email from Forbes. Asterisk congratulations. You've been selected for the 30 under 30 list in healthcare and technology. Asterisk, I stared at the screen for a long time before it sank in. That basement girl, the one who soldered old wires while her father bragged about her brother, had just made it into a magazine her parents kept on the coffee table. The ceremony was held in San Francisco, all glass and gold, a space where every surface reflected success back at you. Reporters buzzed, cameras flashed. People shook my hand, congratulating me on changing the game. I smiled. I thanked them. I posed under bright lights that made my eyes sting. Then, a journalist, poised and articulate, leaned forward during a live interview. So, Isabel, she said, what does your family feel about your success? The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I froze. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. I offered the same polite smile I'd learned to wear years ago. They're not really into this kind of thing, I said. They don't care much for technology. The interviewer laughed, assuming I was joking. Cameras flashed again. But behind that laugh, something inside me went quiet. Later that night, in my hotel room, the award plaque rested on the desk. The city outside glittered, alive with celebration, but I felt none of it. I thought of my father in his old recliner, probably watching football, unaware or uninterested that his daughter's name had been broadcast nationally. My mother, tidying after dinner, perhaps glancing at the muted TV and flipping the channel before my segment aired. And Ethan? He was likely celebrating his own promotion with friends who cheered his every move. The silence from home was almost predictable. Not even a text. Not even a question. I used to think that if I achieved enough, it would force them to see me. That success would be a spotlight bright enough to pierce their indifference. But all the lights in the world couldn't reach them. When the ceremony ended, I stepped outside, holding the glass trophy in one hand, my phone in the other. The night air was cold, the street wet from earlier rain. My reflection in the building's mirrored wall looked like a stranger. Tailored suit, confident smile, hair neatly pulled back. I tried to see the girl my father had ignored, the one who sat at the kids' table, but she was gone. And yet, in her place, I felt only emptiness. Over the next few months, the company scaled faster than I could comprehend. We partnered with national distributors, expanded to dozens of states, received acquisition offers from corporate giants. My calendar overflowed with board meetings and investor calls. I learned the language of business. Efficiency, capital, growth, powerful words, yet meaningless to the child who once just wanted to be seen. Every time a new milestone was reached, someone would say, "You must be so proud." I nod, smile, and thank them. But pride was a strange, foreign concept. I didn't feel proud, just tired. Tired of chasing an acknowledgement that never came. Tired of filling the silence with achievement after achievement. One night, after yet another interview, I went home to my empty apartment in San Jose. I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through my phone, past articles praising my visionary leadership. Then I stopped at a photo from the Forbes event, me holding the award, cameras flashing. The caption read, "From basement tinkerer to tech visionary, Isabel Hart proves that grit beats privilege." I stared at that word, privilege. It made me laugh, quiet and bitter. They had no idea. Privilege was Ethan's name on every trophy, his seat at the adult table, the easy comfort of being loved without earning it. What I had wasn't privilege. It was survival dressed up as ambition. I closed my laptop, set the award on the shelf, and sat in the dark. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The glow from the city outside painted soft rectangles on the floor. I realized I had everything I once thought I wanted: success, stability, recognition. But none of it filled the hollow space I'd carried since childhood. When you grow up invisible, you think visibility will save you. You think if you shine bright enough, the people who ignored you will finally turn their heads. But all it does is cast longer shadows. The next morning, I woke before dawn, standing by the window, watching the fog roll over the city. For the first time, I allowed myself to whisper the truth. They'll never see you the way you hoped they would. And strangely, instead of breaking me, the thought felt like freedom. The world saw me now. The headlines saw me. My colleagues saw me. But my parents, they never would. And maybe that was okay. Because somewhere deep inside, I was beginning to understand something even more powerful than being seen. The peace of knowing I no longer needed to be. After the acquisition deal closed, the world around me moved faster than I could feel it. Meetings, contracts, lawyers, headlines, it all blurred into a breathless rush. The number in my bank account didn't feel real. I'd lived most of my life counting coins for instant noodles, and now I could buy almost anything. But when the noise faded and the congratulatory emails stopped, I realized I didn't want anything. I wanted somewhere that felt like peace. I found it on a gray morning in Seattle. The city was wrapped in mist, the air sharp with salt and rain. The realtor led me into a glass-walled apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the living room, the ocean shimmering beyond like liquid steel. The space was quiet. No echo of footsteps, no hum of conversation. Then at me, and said, "Some kids make you proud. Others." His lips curved into that familiar smirk. "Just take up space." The laughter came easily, just like it used to. Ethan chuckled. His wife covered her mouth. Even the children giggled, not understanding. My mother looked down at her plate, the way she always did when she wanted to disappear. For a second, the old ache rose in my chest, that instinct to shrink, to let it pass, to pretend it didn't hurt. But the woman sitting there wasn't the girl who once hid in the basement. I set my fork down gently and looked at him. "Good thing I just bought my own place," I said evenly, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the lingering laughter. 2,000 miles away, so no one has to make space for me anymore. The laughter stopped instantly. Forks froze. The room fell into that thick, airless silence that follows a truth no one expected to hear. My father's smirk faltered. He blinked, as if unsure whether I was joking. My mother finally looked up, her eyes wide. Ethan shifted in his chair, suddenly fascinated by his glass. I held his gaze, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, indifference. Then I smiled. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly, pushing my chair back. The food was lovely. No one moved as I stood. I walked around the table, my heels clicking softly against the wood floor. At the doorway, I paused, turning back, taking in the scene one last time. The table where I was never enough. The faces that had never really seen me. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. "And don't worry, I won't take up any more space." Then I left. The night air outside was cold and clean, the sky above a deep indigo, scattered with stars. I walked down the driveway to my rental car. The sound of the door closing behind me sealed something larger than just a meal. It sealed a lifetime. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry either. I just felt free. For years, I had thought that healing meant reconciliation, that peace required understanding. But now I realized sometimes peace is simply walking away without the need for anyone to follow. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet, my headlights carving tunnels through the dark. I rolled the window down, letting the cold wind whip across my face. The old radio, yes, I'd brought it with me, sat on the passenger seat, playing a faint, crackling song from some late-night station. And as I listened, I thought of the girl I once was, sitting at the kids' table, small, invisible, waiting for her turn to belong. I wanted to tell her this. Asterisk, you never needed a seat at their table. You were always meant to build your own. Asterisk, when I reached the edge of the city, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house was far behind me, swallowed by the dark. I didn't need to see it anymore. I had already left the part of me that needed it there, and she could finally rest. I didn't win that night by saying something clever. I didn't win at all. I simply stood up and walked away, and that was enough. Christmas arrived, wrapped in the soft gray mist of the Pacific Northwest, the kind that blurred the line between sea and sky until everything looked like peace. In the week leading up to it, my apartment by the bay slowly transformed. Evergreen wreaths hung over the glass doors, threaded with crimson berries and strands of golden light. The long walnut table that had once stood empty now gleamed under the gentle glow of candles. For the first time since I'd bought this place, I wasn't preparing for solitude. I was preparing to share it. It started as a simple idea, an antidote to the hollow echo of that Thanksgiving night. I didn't want to spend Christmas pretending the silence from my family didn't sting. I wanted to fill that silence with something real, something human. So I opened my door to everyone who had ever been made to feel small, unseen, or forgotten. I wrote the invitations by hand. To my former robotics professor at Stanford, Dr. Lang, who once told me, the world needs more quiet builders. To Nora, a fellow engineer laughed out of her old job. To my neighbor, Miguel, a single father working double shifts. To an older couple from my building who'd lost touch with their children. To my cousin Sarah, the only relative who had ever defended me, even when it cost her their approval. And most tenderly, to my grandmother. When I called her, her voice cracked. Seattle? Oh, sweetheart, that's so far. Grandma, I said, smiling into the receiver, I'll send the ticket. You just bring yourself. She chuckled softly. You sound like your mother used to, before she learned to whisper. On Christmas Eve, the first snow of the season dusted the city in quiet silver. Inside, the apartment glowed like a lantern. The table was set with white porcelain and clear crystal, their reflections dancing in candlelight. Sprigs of pine and cranberry ran down the center like a river of winter. The air smelled of rosemary, butter, and salt. The chef I'd hired, a local named Mason, filled the kitchen with roasted salmon and fresh bread. A playlist of soft acoustic carols floated through the space, just loud enough to feel like warmth. One by one, they arrived. Nora came first, bottle of wine in hand, laughing through the cold. Dr. Lang brought a book wrapped in newspaper, muttering about lack of proper paper. Miguel and his son brought homemade flan, still warm. My grandmother arrived last, her small frame bundled in a red coat, her eyes shining brighter than the lights around us. When everyone had settled, I stood at the head of the table. For a moment, I simply looked at the faces turned toward me, each marked by its own version of resilience. Then I said, I know some of us didn't have a place to go this Christmas, but tonight I wanted to make sure everyone had a seat. No one at the kids' table, no one in the corner, no one forgotten. Laughter rippled around the table, gentle, genuine. I sat down, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own story. Dinner unfolded in slow, beautiful waves. Mason brought plates of cedar plank salmon, wild mushroom risotto, warm sourdough. Wine flowed easily, conversation even easier. Nora shared stories of working night shifts in tech, turning corporate arrogance into comedy. Dr. Lang recounted the time I'd accidentally flooded the robotics lab with foam during an experiment, making everyone laugh so hard I nearly spilled my drink. Miguel's bright-eyed 9-year-old son challenged everyone to a trivia game he'd made on his tablet, somehow beating us all. The table was alive. Clinking glasses, shared laughter, hands reaching for bread. No competition, no hierarchy, just connection. Between courses, I slipped into the kitchen to refill a tray of drinks. My grandmother followed, quiet as always. She stood beside me for a moment, watching me work, then said softly, "You know, Isabel, I've sat at many tables in my life. Big ones, small ones, ones where people spoke too loudly, and ones where no one spoke at all. But this..." She gestured toward the laughter drifting from the dining room. "This feels like the first real family dinner I've been to in a long time." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "It's not really family, Grandma. Not by blood." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "No, sweetheart, better. It's by choice." When we returned, dessert had already begun. Slices of flan passed around, plates cluttered with crumbs and joy. Someone had turned up the music slightly, and a few people sang softly along. I looked around the table and realized that every person there carried a story of exclusion. The teacher dismissed for his accent, the colleague for her gender, the cousin labeled too emotional, the grandmother treated as background noise. Every single one of them had been told, in one way or another, that they took up too much space. And yet, here we were, filling a room beautifully. As the night deepened, I raised my glass. "To the ones who were left out," I said, "and to the ones who learned to build new tables." The room fell quiet, then erupted in gentle cheers. Glasses clinked. Someone began humming along to the music again. Later, when the plates were empty and the candles burned low, we lingered, talking, sharing memories, laughing about nothing and everything. I noticed how easily everyone listened to one another. No interruptions, no comparisons, just warmth. My grandmother reached for my hand again, her voice a whisper meant just for me. "You did it, Isabel," she said. "You built the kind of family your father never understood." "Oh, Gran." I turned my head toward her, the candlelight flickering in her eyes. "I didn't build it alone," I said. "They came and they made it real." She nodded slowly. "That's what real families do. They make each other real." When everyone had gone home and the apartment had fallen silent again, I stood by the window overlooking the dark bay. Snow still fell, soft and endless. The table behind me was a beautiful mess. Empty glasses, napkins folded into careless hearts, the faint scent of pine and vanilla lingering. I thought about the home I had grown up in, the rigid lines, the quiet expectations, the laughter that never reached me. And then I looked around this room, filled hours earlier with imperfect, ordinary people who had chosen to show up, to care, to belong. In that moment, I understood something I never had before. Family isn't where you come from, it's where you are seen. No one here shared my last name, but every heart that had walked through my door that night had left something behind. A piece of grace, a spark of healing, a fragment of the love we were all still learning how to give. I walked over to the corner of the room where the old radio sat. I turned the dial gently until a faint tune drifted out, a soft jazz version of Silent Night. The same song that had played in the basement all those years ago when I dreamed of a different life. Only now, it didn't sound like longing. It sounded like home. As the snow thickened outside, I whispered to no one in particular. "There's no family here tonight by blood." But every heart in this room was real. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the city wrapped in quiet white. The apartment still smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon, the table a battlefield of crumbs and candle wax. I was barefoot, holding a mug of coffee, watching sunlight stretch across the floor when my phone buzzed on the counter. At first, I ignored it. I wasn't ready to return to the noise of the world. But when it rang again, then again, I glanced at the screen. Dad. My thumb hovered over the answer button. 7 years of silence, and he was calling now. I hesitated, then swiped to accept. "Isabel." His voice was sharp, controlled, the same tone he used when I was a child and had done something he considered foolish. "Do you know what's happening right now?" I frowned. Good morning to you, too. He ignored that. The entire town seen those pictures. Pictures? The Christmas dinner? He snapped. Someone posted them online. Your cousin, I think. Everyone's sharing it. The warmest Christmas dinner in Seattle. You, in your group. People are calling it inspiring. I blinked, surprised. I hadn't even realized anyone had taken photos. Sarah must have posted them. She loved documenting moments. Apparently, he continued, voice rising, you said something about building a table for the forgotten. You think it's funny? The comments are saying how your family rejected you, how you built your own. You made us look like fools, Isabel. The whole town's talking. I leaned against the counter, staring out the window. I didn't make you look like anything, Dad. You did that all on your own. Watch your tone. There it was. The command, the old dominance, as if time hadn't passed. But I didn't shrink this time. My voice stayed steady, calm like the sea outside. I didn't mention your names. I didn't blame anyone. I just hosted dinner for people who didn't have a place to go. He scoffed, and you called it family. I smiled faintly. It felt like one. There was silence, sharp, uncomfortable. I could almost hear him pacing, gripping the phone too tightly. You always did love dramatics, he said finally. All this self-pity, parading your so-called independence. What? You think you're better than us now? No, I said softly. I think I finally stopped needing you to tell me I'm enough. He exhaled hard, as though my calmness offended him more than any argument could. You have no idea how disrespectful this is. Your mother's been humiliated. Your brother called this morning, says people are asking what happened between us. You've dragged our family through the mud just to play the victim. I closed my eyes. There it is, I thought. Asterisk the story they'd always needed to tell, that I was the problem, that I turned my back on them. Asterisk, I had lived my whole life trying to rewrite that narrative. But now I realized I didn't have to. They could keep their version. I had mine. Dad, I said quiet but firm. You're upset because people saw something true, not because I said it. You've always cared more about how things look than how they are. Don't you dare talk to me like, Robert, that's enough. The voice came from somewhere behind him, faint but unmistakable. My grandmother. I hadn't realized she was with him. Maybe she'd gone there after the holidays. Maybe she'd heard the whole conversation. Mom, he started, but she cut him off. No, you listen to me now. Her voice, weak with age, carried more authority than has ever had. I saw those pictures, too. I saw her table. There was a long pause. I could imagine my father stiffening, ready to defend himself. But my grandmother didn't let him. She didn't shame you, Robert. She didn't even mention your name. She showed people something beautiful. A room full of souls who had nowhere else to go, sitting together, being seen. That's not humiliation. That's grace. But she's not taking up space, my grandmother continued softly. She built a table big enough for everyone who was told there wasn't one. Even for you. Silence filled the line, thick and trembling, the kind that comes when truth finally pierces pride. I stood by the window, gripping the edge of the counter, listening to the faint hum of the call. Finally, my father spoke, quieter now. You don't understand, Mom. People, she interrupted, will forget by next week. But your daughter will remember this moment for the rest of her life. Don't make her remember that her father called her success and embarrassment. He didn't answer. Robert, she said again, gentler now. For once in your life, just be proud of her. Even if you don't understand her, that's all she ever wanted. There was a faint sound, maybe the phone, shifting hands, maybe the scrape of a chair. Then my grandmother's voice, closer to the receiver. Sweetheart, I swallowed hard. I'm here, Grandma. I saw the photos. It was a beautiful dinner. Her voice trembled. You looked happy, truly happy. I whispered. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Those 4 words hit deeper than any award or headline ever could. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I pressed my palm to the glass, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, letting her words sink into the space where all the old wounds used to live. Thank you, I managed. That means everything. I know, she said softly. Then after a pause, don't let his anger make you doubt what you've built. Men like your father don't know how to love without control. But you loved without permission. That's stronger. Ow, I thought. I smiled through the tears I hadn't realized were falling. I think I finally understand that. The line went quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard her say gently, I should go, darling. He's pacing holes in the carpet. I let out a sound full of release. Go easy on him. No, she said, amusement in her voice. He could use a little discomfort. When the call ended, I stood there in the sunlight, my phone still warm in my hand. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was clean. I didn't feel guilt for walking away or sorrow for what was broken. I just felt light. I poured myself another cup of coffee and walked over to the window. The bay shimmered under the winter sun. The world outside, impossibly still. For the first time in my life, my father's voice didn't echo inside me anymore. It had been replaced by another, my grandmother's firm, loving, and infinitely clear. Asterisk, she didn't take up space. She built a new table. Asterisk, and as I watched the waves move in slow, endless rhythm, I realized I had finally done the same. For years, I'd carried the guilt of leaving, the fear that independence made me ungrateful, that success made me selfish. But that morning, with the ocean shining before me and her words still in my chest, I understood something simple and profound. Leaving wasn't betrayal. It was survival. And survival, in its quietest form, was the truest kind of love. The love that builds space for others to breathe. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who had walked away. I felt like the woman who had arrived. New Year's Eve crept in quietly that winter, not with fireworks or noise, but with the kind of stillness that feels like a page turning. The bay outside my window shimmered in soft blues and silvers, city lights reflecting off the water like 1,000 quiet candles. A week had passed since the call from my father, and my grandmother's words still echoed in my chest. I'd replayed them more times than I could count. Asterisk, she didn't take up space. She built a new table. Asterisk, I sat at my desk that morning, watching the slow fall of snow against the glass, and typed a short message. Asterisk, New Year's Eve dinner. If you and Mom would like to come, there's a seat for you. But only if everyone agrees to sit at the same table. No head, no kids, no hierarchy. Equal seats, equal voices. Asterisk, I hovered over the send button for a moment, my thumb trembling slightly, not out of fear, but from something quieter, acceptance. Then I pressed send. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 hours later, one arrived. It was from my mother. Asterisk, we'd like to come. Your father said yes. Asterisk, the words were simple. No apologies, no explanations, but they were enough. That evening, I set the table again. 10 chairs perfectly aligned, candles flickering softly, the sea beyond the windows stretching into darkness. The same table that had once been a symbol of defiance now felt like an invitation, not for reconciliation, but for understanding. At 7 sharp, the elevator chimed. When the door opened, my parents stood there, both looking smaller than I remembered. Time had carved fine lines around their eyes, and the confidence they once wore like armor seemed to have faded. My father's posture was still stiff, his pride intact, but his eyes flickered with something new. Uncertainty. My mother smiled nervously, clutching a small box wrapped in silver paper. Hi, Isabel, she said softly. Hi, Mom. Come in. They stepped inside, glancing around the apartment. My father's gaze lingered on the wall where my degrees and patents hung, framed proof of the life they had chosen not to see. He said nothing, but I saw the faint tightening of his jaw. Dinner was quiet at first. The air carried the careful politeness of strangers, trying to remember how to speak to one another. I served roasted halibut, rosemary potatoes, and wine from a small Oregon vineyard. My mother complimented the view, the food, the candles, anything but the distance between us. My father mostly listened, pushing his fork around his plate, glancing occasionally at the radio in the corner. Finally, it was my mother who broke the silence. You always liked music, she said softly, nodding toward it. Even when you were little, you used to fix that old thing downstairs. Remember? I smiled faintly. I remember. A long pause stretched across the table. The city lights danced through the glass behind them, painting soft gold across their faces. Then, unexpectedly, my father spoke. He hesitated, his voice slower now. Maybe I didn't see it. I looked up. See what? He exhaled. What you were doing. Who you were becoming. I thought Ethan was the one who needed us more. You always seemed self-sufficient. My mother nodded slowly. I think I told myself you were fine, Isabel. You never complained. You just kept going. I didn't realize that silence doesn't mean peace. Her words landed gently, without defense or excuse, just a kind of late honesty. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I wanted to let it breathe, to let them feel the weight of what was being said. My father looked down at his hands. I shouldn't have said what I said that night, he murmured. The toast. I let out a small breath, not quite laughter, not quite forgiveness. It's all right, I said softly. You were right in a way. Some kids do make their parents proud. Others just make themselves free. He looked up, startled by the calmness in my voice, but there was no anger there, only truth. The rest of the evening passed in fragments of memory, small stories, laughter that felt tentative but real, pauses that weren't uncomfortable anymore. For the first time, we weren't a hierarchy. We were just three people sitting at the same table, learning how to exist without old rules. Ethan had been invited, but he hadn't come. My mother mentioned him once, then stopped, sensing it wasn't the night for comparisons. After dinner, I poured us each a glass of champagne. Midnight was only minutes away. I stood and walked toward the balcony, the crisp night air meeting my face as I opened the glass door. Behind me, the city hummed, fireworks readying in the distance, laughter spilling from nearby apartments. My parents followed, standing quietly on either side of me. The sea below shimmered in moonlight, the sound of the waves rising and falling like breath. I raised my glass and said softly, "To new tables and to equal seats." My father looked at me, then nodded. "To equal seats," he echoed. For the first time in my life, the words didn't sound forced. We stood there as fireworks bloomed above the water, bursts of red and gold lighting the sky. I thought about every dinner table I'd ever sat at, the kids' table that made me invisible, the family table where I was an afterthought, the empty table in my Seattle apartment that became a symbol of self-respect. And now this one, imperfect, quiet human. When the last firework faded, my parents said goodnight. My mother hugged me for a long time before leaving. My father lingered a moment, as if he wanted to say something else, then simply said, "Take care of yourself, Isabel." "I always do," I said. When the door closed behind them, the apartment fell silent again. But it wasn't the old kind of silence, the cold, echoing kind. It was soft, earned, full of space. I walked back to the balcony, still holding my glass. The reflections of the city rippled across the water like tiny constellations. I took a slow sip, feeling the bubbles sting the back of my throat, and whispered into the night, "Some kids make their parents proud. Others make themselves free." The words drifted into the air, dissolving into the sound of the sea. Inside, the candles on the table flickered, their flames swaying gently. The radio hummed a slow jazz tune, the same one I'd played on Christmas. I stood there for a long time, listening to the soft rhythm of the city, to the heartbeat of a life I had built without permission. Then, turning toward the camera, toward the invisible audience that had followed my story all this way, I said quietly, "If you've ever been told that you take up too much space, remember this. You can build your own place. And if you do it with heart, with courage, with love, it won't just be a place. It will be a whole world." The music swelled softly as I set my glass down on the railing. "Don't wait to be invited to their table," I added. "Build your own, and make it wide enough for everyone who was once told they didn't belong." The scene lingered. The woman standing against the sea, the lights of Seattle behind her, the radio still whispering the same soft tune. Then slowly, the camera faded to black. And with it came peace. Not the peace of being accepted, but the peace of being whole.